Here's 5 things that I personally quit to lose belly fat way faster, and to show you proof that this actually works. Here is my transformation. This used to be me. I was overweight, unattractive, and had zero confidence. This is me now. I'm lean, I have more confidence, and I get more attention. So with that being said, let's get started. Number 1, being too restricted with your diet. This is a very common mistake that most people do, especially when they're first starting out, right? And I did this myself. You have the mindset that in order for you to get the results that you want, you need to be 100% perfect with every single small thing that you eat. Now, sure, having a good routine when it comes to your food, that is great for your health and all, but it doesn't have to be that restricted to actually get the results that you want. I don't know about you, but for me personally, right, when I go really intense periods of eating healthy, I dial every single thing in, to the gram of rice that I'm having. When I go this intense, my cravings just go crazy after a couple of days. If I walk into my kitchen, right, and I see either a bag of chips or, some chocolate, I can't help myself but have a piece or two. And soon before I know it, right, I've eaten the complete thing. This right here was a cycle that I got stuck in for months and months at a time, making close to no results to my body. And this only left me more frustrated. Because I got frustrated, right, I just kept eating the bad foods more and more and more. Now, if you feel like you want my help with this, where I will personally guide you step by step along the way, to lose fat and become way more attractive in less time than it took me personally, then click the first link in the description. I remember thinking to myself, like, I'm doing the right things, I'm eating better, and I'm improving myself. But for some reason, the change is like way slower than I thought it would be. This was the reason why. I was simply being way too restrictive with the way that I was eating. And it wasn't sustainable in the long run. And therefore, I was constantly messing up, eating the bad foods that I shouldn't be eating, like the chocolate and the chips and whatever you can think of. The problem is, right, when we hear the words eating healthy, we just instantly assume that, you need to eat chicken, broccoli, and rice every single day. And there's nothing more to it. But that is not the case whatsoever. Now, I'm not saying, that if you only eat chicken, broccoli, and rice, you won't get results, because you will get results. However, just imagine this for yourself. It's not fun nor sustainable for a long period of time if you're not like a robot, with zero taste buds. Because even if you're really disciplined, if you have chicken, broccoli, and rice enough times, right, it's just gonna taste bad no matter what you do. What truly helped me was that once I changed my approach, to having like 80 or 90% clean foods, but having like 10 to 20%, being more flexible, and I can have some things that I actually enjoyed. This was the recipe for me personally to get way better results and actually making it sustainable for the long run. Having a burger or a pizza at the end of the week, right, it's not gonna ruin your progress. However, what is gonna ruin your progress is if you're just overeating. What I personally did that kept me sustainable is that I treat myself to one meal every week that I can decide on whatever I want. If I want one pizza, I'm only gonna have one pizza. I'm not going to have like cake and cookies and ice cream the same day. I'm going to have that one pizza, and the next meals I eat that day is still going to be the healthy ones. But I still got to treat myself for that one meal. I see it as somewhat of a reward system. You work the previous days of eating better, through Monday to Saturday, for example. You eat healthy during all those days. And that at the end of the week, you can actually treat yourself. Then it's actually something you can look forward to. And it's a motivation for you to actually eat healthy the previous days. And trust me when I say this, if you follow this principle instead of going crazy, from the start and just basically making it unsustainable, having this approach instead will make it so much easier to actually stick to a healthy diet. Number 2, relying too much on intense cardio. These are the 2 main mistakes that I see people do, especially when they want to get in shape. They make an unsustainable diet and they do endless amounts of cardio, hours and hours every single day when it's not necessary. I used to be the exact same way as well. I remember watching fitness videos, particularly on fat loss, right? And they kept talking about high intensity cardio, going for daily runs and, cycling every single day, and the list goes on. Now, since I was watching these videos, right, and the people who were talking on the videos, they were actually in shape, I just thought to myself, like, this is the only way to actually make progress. I need to do endless and endless amounts of cardio or I'm not going to make any progress. What I started doing was bike rides and going for running every single day. And, I had no experience with doing this amount of cardio, right? So can you just guess what happened to my body next? I think it took me like seriously 2 weeks, and then I decided to give up because this was just way too intense for me. I was an overweight beginner and I had like no cardio to even begin with. I got exhausted by walking up the stairs. So how could I expect, to go for bike rides and runs every single day? That's not sustainable whatsoever. I can remember my legs and shins, right? They were just in constant pain every single day because they were so overworked. It got to the point where I was just struggling to walk down the stairs. And this was me in my early 20s, when I should be the most healthiest version of myself. I had to change my approach because this was not sustainable. And that's exactly what I did. Instead of doing high intensity cardio, I did what's called LISS, low intensity, steady state cardio. Now, this sounds way fancier than it actually is. Basically, it's just that you do some form of low intensity cardio that you can do for a long amount of time. And in my case personally, I just did more walking on a daily basis. Now, instead of doing these super intense cardio sessions, bike riding and running every single day, I was just going on slow walks every single day instead. And that made a massive difference, and it was actually way more sustainable. Doing like a 30 to 45 minute walk every single day at a slow pace, this was the main cardio exercise that I did. To go from looking like this to now looking like this. And I'm not even kidding you. Walking is so underrated when it comes to fat loss. Not only did it improve the way that my body looked, right? But most importantly, I didn't feel pain in my body whatsoever because it wasn't that intense. And I could still make good progress without having the pain. So it's just a win-win situation. It's simply just so much more sustainable than going for these intense cardio sessions, bike riding and running. And a milestone that I set for myself personally, and you can follow as well, is to go for 10,000 steps every single day. This is a good milestone to follow, and it keeps you motivated to actually walk throughout the day because you have like a goal that you're working towards. Number 3, thinking that more supplements is the answer. This is the trap that most beginners fall into, and I did the same thing as well. And we hear from all these different influencers about the supplements that will help with fat loss, and blah blah help with this and blah blah help with this. And like they don't even work to begin with. They say it will increase your testosterone and it's going to make you stronger, and the list goes on. So of course we buy into this and we get the supplement, only for us to get left with disappointment. Like back in the day, right? I'm not even kidding. I could easily spend like a couple $100 every single month on new supplements because, I heard from this influencer that this is going to be the new big thing. And this is also going to be the new big thing. So I just decided to buy all of them because I thought that was going to help me with my journey. The harsh truth is that most of these supplements, right, they have like close to no effect whatsoever. And they're basically just lying straight to your face. Because most of these people who have a great physique, right, they don't even have that physique because of the supplement. They do completely different things to get that physique. And they just talk about the supplement like that is the key to success when it's literally not. They're called supplements for a reason. They're not going to be some magic pill, that will completely transform your body without you having to put the work in. And if people say that they will transform your body without you having to work, just realize that they're completely bullshitting you straight to your face for the main reason of just getting more money. It was once I realized this myself and just started to focus on perfecting the basics instead. That's when I started to see good progress, just like in this picture right here. Improving my diet, improving my sleep and recovery, and, staying hydrated, and all those basic things that people talk about, but they get overlooked over and over. This is the main way to actually get results. Not trying to take some random product that you don't even know what's contained in it. You just trust them blindly to actually get the results. Meanwhile, it's proven over and over and over that the basics is all that you need. Now, if you want my personal help, where I will guide you step by step along the way, to becoming lean and losing fat, but also getting way more attractive in less time than it took me personally, without making complicated diets or complicated workouts, then click the first link in the description. Now, however, right, just because I'm talking about supplements and, the shady business around it, that doesn't mean that I'm completely against supplements. I personally use creatine and protein powder because they're convenient, but also, there's been so many studies over and over that actually shown that they both make you get faster results. So those are the only supplements that I would recommend you. Get some protein powder for convenience and then take creatine on a daily basis. That is pretty much it. What I want you to do is just realize that supplements is not gonna be the answer to your results. Just focus on the basics, improve the way that you eat and improve the way that you exercise. And that's the only two things that matters. Not only will this save you time, but most importantly, it will save your money as well, which you can put on, buying food or protein powder or anything else that is actually useful instead of these BS products. Number 4, waiting for the perfect time to start. How many times have you heard this scenario? Oh, so you're just telling me that you're gonna start exercising and taking care of yourself, right? Yeah, I'm gonna start exercising and eating better once work gets easier and once everything settles down, then I'm gonna start. How many times have we heard this story? So many times, over and over and over, and it always leads to the same results. You ask these people how it's going with everything, a couple of weeks later, and they still give you this same excuse like in the beginning. And this story just keeps on going over and over. It goes months and months, and they still give you the same excuse. Oh, I'm waiting for the perfect moment to start. I'm waiting for work to settle down, or for this to settle down. When they're just procrastinating. I used to think the same way myself, so I'm not blaming these people. I waited for the perfect moment for months and months. I wanted to wait for everything in my life to perfectly align before I started getting in shape. And this left me in the same exact spot for months and months, making no progress to my body whatsoever. The reality is, right, and you already know this, there is no perfect moment. You just have to get started and adapt yourself along the way. The hardest part will always be in the beginning, but once you just get some consistency in, it's only gonna get easier from there. I personally believe, right, not a single person in the entire world don't have the time to get some exercise in every single day. Let's say 30 minutes. If you don't have that time, you simply don't prioritize it. You have the time, but you don't really care about it. You never get time with anything in your life. You create the time for it, if it's actually a priority. Otherwise, the priority is that you scroll on your phone for 3 hours when you can actually get some exercise in. It's about priority and nothing else. You have all the time in the world. So if you say that you don't have the time, it's simply because you don't prioritize it. And that is literally crazy to me. You don't prioritize your own health and well-being because you want to scroll on your phone or watch YouTube videos instead. Like seriously, you're not getting any younger. So why not take care of your body when you actually have some time? Look, time is gonna pass no matter what, right? So it's up to you how you wanna spend it. Do you wanna get a return on investment by spending it wisely? Or do you wanna waste your time every single day doing complete nonsense stuff? Not only making your life worse, but your health worse as well. Completely just frying your attention span with the endless scrolling. You make the choice. Number 5, trying to rush the process for better results. Now this goes hand in hand with the previous point that I mentioned. When people actually decide to get in shape, they have this mindset that they need to go balls to the wall from day one, and that's not necessary. I did the same thing myself, where I thought that if I just did more on a daily basis, that I would get way faster and better results. But that is far from the truth. In my case, I thought I would be able to work out for 5 days a week and eat healthy with every single meal without having any prior experience whatsoever. This was literally just setting myself up for failure and nothing else. What ended up happening was that after just 2 weeks, right, I got completely overwhelmed and then I just decided to quit. And this was a cycle that I kept repeating for months and months and months. My body looked like this legit for just months at a time. I made zero progress whatsoever, because I just couldn't be consistent. It was once I took the slower approach and the more sustainable approach that I actually started to see progress, because I could stay consistent over a longer period of time instead of doing like 2 weeks there and 2 weeks here. That will not give you the results that you want. Consistency at a slower pace will always beat going fast in a small amount of time. Just think about this yourself. Marathon runners, right? They have to pace themselves, because imagine you have one guy just sprinting all out from the start. In just a matter of minutes, he's gonna get passed by the people who has a steady pace, because they can do it for a long amount of time. Fitness is no different to this. You have to be consistent, but at a slower pace. Take the slower approach and learn the basics properly of, eating better and exercising. And I will promise you that you will get results so much faster than you actually think. Now remember, if you want my personal help with this, where I will guide you step by step along the way to becoming lean and losing fat, but also getting way more attractive in less time than it took me personally, then click the first link in the description.